In the harsh heart of Wyoming Territory, 1875, she appeared like a ghost at his door, a bride in a tattered wedding dress, her dreams as shattered as the pearls scattered across her bodice. Most folks in these parts would have turned her away, whispered their judgments, and left her to the mercy of the wilderness. But Jackson McCall wasn't most folks. Something in her eyes reminded him of a wild mare he'd once gentled, fierce yet frightened, yearning for a safe place to call home. As he opened his door that stormy night, neither could have guessed how one act of kindness would change both their lives forever. Could a broken bride and a solitary rancher find healing in each other's arms? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra, special for you. The old cast-iron kettle whistled sharply, its steam rising like the ghost of her past into the warmth of Jackson McCall's kitchen. The woman, she hadn't offered her name yet, sat huddled in his mother's old rocking chair, her wedding dress now hidden beneath one of his spare work shirts and a worn quilt. Her hands, still trembling, wrapped around the cup of tea he offered. "Drink," he said softly, keeping his distance. "It'll warm you up." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating her face. Even through the dirt and tears, he could see she was young, probably mid-20s, with delicate features that spoke of a genteel upbringing. Her eyes, though, those eyes had seen too much. Mrs. Rivera, his housekeeper, bustled in from the back room carrying a stack of clothes. "These might fit, Senora. They belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Denver." The woman's voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. "Sarah, my name is Sarah." Jackson nodded, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. 10 years of breaking horses had taught him how to handle spooked creatures. "Well, Sarah, you're welcome. Just stay the night. Storm's too bad to send anyone out in it." Mrs. Rivera shot him a look that suggested she had opinions about taking in strange women, but she kept them to herself. Good woman, Mrs. Rivera, knew when to speak and when to hold her tongue. I can't pay you," Sarah said, fingers twisting. In the quilt, didn't ask for payment. Jackson moved to stoke the fire. "Bedrooms upstairs, first door on the right. Mrs. Rivera will show you up when you're ready." Sarah's eyes darted between them, weighing trust against necessity. Finally, necessity won out. She stood, the quilt falling around her like a protective shield. "Thank you, Mr. McCall. Jackson McCall, but most folks just call me Jack." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Thank you, Mr. McCall." He watched her follow Mrs. Rivera upstairs, noticed how she kept one hand trailing along the wall for support. Once they were gone, he settled into his chair by the fire, pulling out his pipe. Something about her story wasn't adding up. Wedding. Dress, but no groom. Refined manners, but traveling alone, and those eyes, they held secrets darker than any storm. Morning brought clarity to the Wyoming landscape, sunshine painting the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Jackson was already in the barn when he heard the house door open. Sarah stepped out, transformed by Mrs. Rivera's borrowed clothes. The simple calico dress and sturdy boots made her look less like a lost bride and more like, well, like she belonged. "Mr. McCall?" She approached cautiously, each step measured. "I wanted to thank you for your kindness last night. I'll be on my way as soon as—" "You know how to milk a cow?" he interrupted, continuing his work of filling feed troughs. What? "Milk a cow, collect eggs, basic ranch work." He turned to face her. "Mrs. Rivera's getting on in years. Could use some help around here if you're interested in earning your keep." Hope and suspicion warred on her face. "You'd let me stay? Just like that? You don't even know me." "Know enough." He picked up an empty milk pail. "Know you're running from something. Know you need a safe place, and know I've got more work." Then hands to do it. He held out the pail. "So, you want to learn how to milk a cow?" Sarah stared at the pail for a long moment. Then slowly, she reached out and took it. Yes, I would." "Good." He gestured toward the barn. First lesson starts now. The morning passed in a blur of new experiences. Sarah proved a quick study, though her hands were soft and unused to labor. She approached each task with determination, if not skill, and by noon she had successfully, if messily, milked her first cow, collected eggs without getting pecked, and learned the basics of feeding the livestock. "You're a natural," he said, over lunch, watching her devour Mrs. Rivera's fresh bread and stew. "I'm a disaster," she countered, but there was a hint of pride in her voice, "though I suppose I can only improve from here." "That's the spirit." He pushed back from the table. "Rest up. Afternoon brings more lessons." As he headed back out, he heard Mrs. Rivera speaking softly to Sarah in Spanish, teaching her the words for common kitchen items. He smiled. Mrs. Rivera had raised 3 daughters of her own. She knew a lost soul when she saw one. The days began to take on a rhythm. Sarah would rise early, helping Mrs. Rivera with breakfast before joining Jackson for the morning chores. Her hands grew calloused, her skin tanned by the Wyoming sun. She learned to read the weather, to anticipate the needs of the animals, to find joy in simple accomplishments. But she never spoke of her past, never explained the wedding dress now, carefully folded and hidden away in her room, never mentioned family or friends who might be missing her. And sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, that haunted look would return to her eyes. Jackson didn't push. He had his own ghosts, after all, his own reasons for choosing solitude on this remote ranch. But watching Sarah bloom under the vast Wyoming sky, he began to wonder if solitude was really what either of them needed. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the clouds, Sarah broke their comfortable silence. "Why did you really let me stay?" He considered the question, packing his pipe with careful precision. 10 years ago, someone gave me a chance when I needed one. Figured it was time to pass that kindness along." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "And you're not curious about where I came from? What I might be running from? Reckon you'll tell me when you're ready." He lit his pipe, the smoke curling up into the darkening sky. "Or not. Your choice." Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "There are people who might come looking for me." "Figured as much." He blew out a perfect smoke ring. "Good, and think this ranch is hard to find if you don't know where to look." A week turned into 2, then 3. Sarah's presence began to change the ranch in subtle ways. Fresh curtains appeared in the windows, made from feed sacks she'd bleached and sewn. The garden, long neglected, sprouted new life under her careful tending. Even the ranch hands noticed the difference, commenting on how much better the meals were now that she was helping Mrs. Rivera in the kitchen. But it was the laughter that changed things most. Sarah's laugh, when it finally came, was like sunshine, breaking through storm clouds. It transformed her entire face, erasing the shadows in her eyes, if only for a moment. Jackson found himself looking for ways to coax that laugh out more often, telling her stories about his early days of ranching, sharing the mishaps and triumphs that had shaped his life. And somehow, without either of them quite noticing, the ranch began to feel less like a refuge and more like a home. The weekly trip into River's Bend was unavoidable. Even a ranch as self-sufficient as Jackson's needed supplies, and the telegram office was their only link to the outside world. Sarah sat rigid beside him in the wagon, her face partially hidden beneath a modest bonnet Mrs. Rivera had insisted she wear. "Small towns have long memories and longer tongues," Mrs. Rivera had warned while helping Sarah dress. Best to give them less to talk about. But talk they would. Jackson could already see curtains twitching as they rolled down Main Street, curious, eyes following their progress. River's Bend might have grown since he'd first settled here, but it was still the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did. The general store's bell jingled as they entered. Old man Harrison looked up from his ledger, his eyebrows rising at the sight of Sarah. "Jack McCall," he said slowly. Don't believe I've had the pleasure of meeting your guest. Miss Sarah's helping out at the ranch, Jackson replied, his tone discouraging further questions. We'll need the usual supplies, and some fabric, if you've got any suitable for work clothes. Harrison's wife emerged from the back room, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of Sarah's appearance. We just got in some lovely calico, though perhaps the lady would prefer something more bridal. Sarah stiffened beside him. Jackson stepped closer, deliberately placing himself between Sarah and Mrs. Harrison's probing gaze. The calico will do fine, he said firmly, and we'll need extra coffee, sugar, and flour this month. As they gathered their supplies, whispers followed them through the store. Sarah kept her head down, but Jackson could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands trembled slightly as she examined bolts of fabric. The bell jingled again, and Thomas Blackwood strode in. The banker's son was everything Jackson wasn't: polished, educated back east, and thoroughly convinced of his own importance, his eyes fixed on Sarah with immediate interest. Well, well, Blackwood drawled. Seems the rumors are true. Jack McCall's taken in a stray. Jackson's hand stilled on the sack of flour he was lifting. Miss Sarah's my employee, Blackwood. That's all you need to know. Of course, of course. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. Though I can't help but wonder if the lady might prefer more civilized accommodations. The Blackwood house always has room for a genteel companion. Sarah's voice, when it came, was quiet but firm. I'm quite satisfied with my current situation, Mr. Blackwood. Thank you. Are you? Blackwood stepped closer, lowering his voice. Because I couldn't help but notice your resemblance to a certain photograph that's been circulating. Something about a runaway bride from Denver. The sack of flour hit the counter with a thud. Jackson turned, his movement deliberately casual, but his eyes hard. That's enough, Blackwood. A tense moment passed. Then Blackwood smiled again, tipping his hat. Just looking out for the lady's welfare, McCall. We all know your reputation with strays. After he left, Sarah helped Jackson load the wagon in silence. It wasn't until they were well outside town that she spoke. I should leave. I'm bringing trouble to your door. Blackwood's all talk, Jackson replied, though his grip on the reins tightened. Been trying to buy my land for years. This is just his latest attempt to cause trouble. The photograph he mentioned don't matter to me. He glanced at her. Unless you want it to. Sarah twisted her hands in her lap. The story in the papers, it's not entirely accurate. Stories rarely are. He clicked to the horses, urging them a bit faster. Way I see it, everyone's got a past. It's what they do with their future that counts. That evening, Jackson found a copy of the latest territorial newspaper on his porch, folded to show a particular article. He burned it without reading it, but the message was clear. Blackwood wasn't going to let this go. The next few days brought more changes. Sarah started taking her meals in the kitchen instead of the dining room. She worked harder than ever, as if trying to prove her worth. And sometimes late at night, Jackson would hear her pacing in her room above his. The ranch hands, loyal to Jackson and fond of Sarah's cooking, closed ranks around her. They reported back about questions being asked in town, about Blackwood, making inquiries. Even Mrs. Rivera's weekly visits to church brought back whispers of scandal and speculation. But it was the telegram that finally forced the issue. It arrived on a sunny afternoon, delivered by young Tommy Wilson from town. Mr. Blackwood said to make sure you got this right away, Mr. McCall, Tommy said, handing over the envelope. Jackson read it slowly, his expression unchanging. Then he walked to the kitchen where Sarah was helping Mrs. Rivera preserve peaches. Seems like it's time we had that talk about your past, he said quietly, holding out the telegram. Before someone else tells your story for you. Sarah stared at the telegram in her hands, then carefully set it aside. Not here, she said softly. Not with the peaches waiting to be preserved. Tonight after supper, I'll tell you everything then. Jackson nodded, understanding the need to keep her hands busy, to maintain the rhythm of normal life for just a few hours more. "I'll be on the porch when you're ready." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of productive work. Sarah threw herself into the preservation process with almost desperate energy, following Mrs. Rivera's instructions with careful precision. Each jar sealed was a small victory, a tiny piece of future security created by her own hands. "You have good instincts," Mrs. Rivera said, watching Sarah test the seals. "Strong hands now, too, not like when you first came." Sarah examined her. Palms marked with calluses and small burns. "They're not very ladylike anymore." "Ah, but they're useful hands, hands that can build a life." Mrs. Rivera's smile was knowing. Much better than soft hands that can only take. As the sun began to set, Sarah gathered the tools she'd been using to tend the small kitchen garden she'd started. The worn spade, pruning shears, and trowel had become familiar friends over the past weeks. She cleaned each one carefully, the way Jackson had taught her to care for all tools. "A well-maintained tool will never let you down," he'd said. The same could be said for well-maintained truths, she supposed. The garden itself was beginning to show real promise. Neat rows of vegetables stretched toward the setting sun, and the herb patch she'd started was already providing fresh flavors for their meals. Even the flowers she'd planted, which Jackson had initially questioned as impractical, were proving their worth by attracting bees to help pollinate the vegetables. "You've got a good eye for growing things," Jackson had admitted yesterday, surveying her work, seeing possibilities where others might just see dirt. Now, as she put away the last of the tools, Sarah wondered if he would still see possibilities. In her once, he knew the truth. The evening meal was quieter than usual. The ranch hands, sensing the tension, ate quickly and made themselves scarce. Mrs. Rivera busied herself with cleanup, shooing Sarah away when she tried to help. "Some conversations need to happen," the older woman said gently. "Better to face them than let them fester." The porch steps creaked as Sarah settled beside Jackson. He was smoking his pipe, the familiar scent of tobacco wrapping around them like a comfort blanket. For a long moment, they sat in silence, watching the first stars appear. "Back in Denver," Sarah began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I was engaged to be married, Charles Whitmore, from one of the city's oldest families. It was arranged, you could say. My father's business was failing, and the Whitmores had money and influence." Jackson listened without comment, the gentle glow of his pipe the only movement. 2 days before the wedding, I discovered something. Documents in Charles's study, he and my father. They were planning to use the marriage to take control of what was left of my mother's estate, money she'd left in trust for me. Sarah's hands twisted in her skirt. "When I confronted them, Charles, he showed his true nature. Said once we were married, my opinions wouldn't matter anyway." She touched her wrist unconsciously, and Jackson's eyes narrowed at the gesture. "The night before the wedding, I tried to run. Charles caught me, reminded me of my duty, of what would happen to my father's reputation if I caused a scandal." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I almost went through with it, walked down the aisle, said the words, but when the minister asked if anyone objected—" "You objected to your own wedding," Jackson said softly. Sarah nodded. "Caused quite a scene. Charles was furious. My father, I've never seen him so angry. I ran. Took only what I was wearing and ran until I couldn't run anymore. Somehow ended up here." Silence fell again. Sarah waited for judgment, for disappointment, for the kind of lecture about family duty she'd heard all her life. Instead, Jackson tapped out his pipe and said, "Reckon that garden of yours needs a proper fence. Rabbits'll get in once things really start growing." Sarah blinked. That's all you have to say. Figure you've heard enough opinions about your choices." He stood, offering her his hand. "I'm more interested in what you plan to do with your freedom now that you've claimed it." Sarah looked at his offered hand, rough with work and honest calluses. So different from Charles's soft, manicured fingers that had always felt wrong when they touched her. "I'd like to learn more about farming," she said, taking his hand and standing. "Real farming, not just kitchen gardens. And maybe keep making this place a little more beautiful, if you don't mind the flowers." Jackson's smile was barely visible in the gathering dark, but she felt it all the same. "Reckon we can manage that, though you should know. Yes, once you build something here, make it yours. I reckon it'll be harder to run away again." Sarah looked out at her garden, at the ranch house glowing with lamplight, at the vast Wyoming sky stretching overhead. "Maybe," she said softly, "I'm tired of running." In the pale light of dawn, Sarah twisted the gold band from her finger for the first time since her flight. She'd kept it as a reminder, a warning of what she'd escaped, but now it felt more like a shackle than a shield. The ring caught the morning sun, throwing accusations in glinting flashes. The sound of boots on the stairs made her quickly tuck it into her apron pocket. Jackson appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression grave. "Rider coming, moving fast." Sarah's heart stuttered. "Charles." "No. Woman. Fancy dress, city horse." He met her eyes. "Know anyone like that?" "Rebecca," Sarah whispered, a mix of relief and dread washing over her. "My sister." They watched from the porch as the rider approached. Rebecca Caldwell sat her horse like a lady, despite her dusty appearance, her dark hair escaping its pins after what must have been a long journey. She dismounted with practiced grace, though. Her fashionable traveling dress was ill-suited for ranch life. "Sarah Elizabeth Caldwell," Rebecca called out, her voice carrying equal measures of exasperation and relief. "Do you have any idea what you've put us through?" Sarah stepped forward, feeling Jackson's solid presence behind her. "Hello, Becca." The sisters stared at each other for a long moment before Rebecca rushed forward, pulling Sarah into a fierce embrace. "You foolish, brave, impossible girl. When Charles said you'd run, I thought—" She pulled back, examining Sarah's face. "But look at you. You're different." "Stronger," Sarah said quietly. "Happier." Rebecca's eyes darted to Jackson, taking in his protective stance. "So I see. And this is Jackson McCall. He owns this. A ranch." Sarah straightened her spine. "He gave me a chance when I needed one. Did he now?" Rebecca's tone held a hint of her society upbringing. "And what exactly are your intentions toward my sister, Mr. McCall?" "Becca!" Sarah protested, but Jackson stepped forward. "My intention is to give her a safe place to build whatever life she chooses." His voice was calm but firm. "Nothing more, nothing less." Rebecca studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Better than Charles's intentions, at any rate." She turned back to Sarah. "Speaking of which, that's why I'm here. Charles is coming." The world seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet. Jackson's hand found her elbow, steadying her. "How?" Sarah managed. "He hired a detective, has been tracking you across 3 territories." Rebecca's face was grim. "He's determined to either bring you back or ruin you trying. Father's helping him. They're spreading stories about your mental instability." Sarah's hand went to her pocket, feeling the weight of the ring. "They can't force me to marry him. The ceremony wasn't completed." "This isn't about marriage anymore, Sarah. It's about pride. About control." Rebecca took her sister's hands. "Charles can't stand that you defied him. He's already ruined 2 other families who he suspected of helping you." Jackson's voice cut through Sarah's rising panic. "How long?" "A week, maybe less." Rebecca squared her shoulders. "I came as soon as I confirmed where you were. Took some creative misdirection to buy you even that much time." Sarah looked around. At the ranch, at her garden, the freshly painted porch rails, the kitchen windows with their cheerful curtains, at the life she'd begun to build. "I'll have to run again," she said softly. "No." Jackson's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "Running's what he expects, what he wants." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "You can't seriously think you can stand against the Whitmores. Their influence means nothing out here." Jackson turned to Sarah. "Unless you want to run." Sarah pulled the ring from her pocket, held it up to the morning light. All those weeks ago she'd run from the church wearing it, letting it remind her of her shame. Now, with sudden decision, she walked to the edge of the porch and threw it as far as she could. The small gold band disappeared into the tall grass, taking with it the last of her fear. "No more running," she said, turning back to them. "This is my home now. I won't let them take it." Rebecca looked between them, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Well then, little sister, I suppose we'd better prepare for war." That evening, after Rebecca had been settled in the guest room, Sarah found Jackson in the barn, checking the horses one last time before nightfall. "You don't have to fight this battle," she said quietly. "It's not your war." He continued brushing down his favorite mare, his movements steady and sure. "Reckon it became my war the moment you threw that ring away." He glanced at her. "Unless you'd rather I stayed out of it?" Sarah thought of all the small kindnesses he'd shown her, the way he'd given her space to heal, to grow, to become someone new, someone stronger. "I've never had anyone fight for me before," she admitted. "It was always about what I could do for them, father, child, society." Jackson set down the brush, turning to face her fully. "Way I see it, you're worth fighting for, just as you are." The distance between them seemed to shrink, the barn's shadows wrapping around them like a cocoon. Sarah could feel her heart pounding, could see the same awareness in Jackson's eyes. "Jack," she whispered, and for the first time the nickname felt right on her tongue. He took a step closer, then stopped, as voices carried from the house. Rebecca calling for Sarah, Mrs. Rivera announcing supper. The moment broke, but something had shifted, something neither of them could take back. "Better go in," Jackson said roughly. "Your sister will be wondering." Sarah nodded, but paused at the barn door. "Jack." "Thank you for everything." His smile was barely visible in the gathering dusk. "Any time, Sarah, any time." The leather work gloves felt strange in Rebecca's perfectly manicured hands. She stared at them as if they were exotic creatures, while Sarah demonstrated how to muck out a stall. "You can't be serious," Rebecca said, wrinkling her nose. "You do this every day?" Sarah smiled, remembering her own initial reaction to ranch work. "Every morning, and it's not so bad once you get used to it." She gestured to her own well-worn gloves. "These help." Rebecca shook her head in wonder. The Sarah I knew wouldn't have known which end of a pitchfork to hold. "Now look at you, all capable and happy." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah leaned on her pitchfork, considering. "I am happy, Becca. For the first time in my life I'm doing something real, something that matters." "And Mr. McCall?" Rebecca's tone was carefully neutral. "Does he matter too?" Before Sarah could answer, Jackson's voice called from outside. "Sarah, need your help with the new calf." "Coming." She handed Rebecca the pitchfork. "Your turn. Just remember what I showed you." Rebecca's horrified expression followed her out of the barn. The new calf had been born weak, requiring round-the-clock care. Sarah found Jackson kneeling beside it in the smaller barn they used for sick animals. Without a word, she knelt beside him, helping to support the calf's head while he tried to get it to drink. They worked in comfortable silence, their movements synchronized by weeks of shared labor. The calf finally took the bottle, drawing strength from the warm milk. "She's doing better," Sarah observed, stroking the calf's neck. "Her breathing steadier." Jackson nodded. "Thanks to your care. You've got away with the weak ones." "I understand them," she said softly. "What it's like to need someone to believe in you." His hand brushed hers as they steadied the bottle together. The touch sent warmth spreading up her arm, settling somewhere near her heart. "Sometimes," Jackson said carefully, "the ones who start weakest end up being the strongest." Sarah met his eyes, reading the deeper meaning there. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. A commotion from the main barn broke the spell. Rebecca's voice rose in a most unladylike shriek, followed by the sound of something or someone falling into hay. They found Rebecca sprawled in an empty stall, covered in straw and looking utterly mortified. The pitchfork lay beside her, thankfully harmless in its fall. That's it, she declared, allowing Sarah to help her up. I'm not cut out for ranch life. I don't know how you do it, Sarah. Practice, Sarah laughed, brushing hay from her sister's dress. And good teachers. She glanced at Jackson, who was unsuccessfully trying to hide his amusement. Later that afternoon, Jackson found Sarah in the tack room repairing a broken bridle. Her fingers moved surely over the leather, the stitches neat and even. You've got a good hand with leather work, he observed, settling onto a nearby stool. Mrs. Rivera's been teaching me. Sarah tied off her thread. She says every ranch wife should know how to... She stopped abruptly, blushing. Jackson picked up a piece of scrap leather, turning it over in his hands. Your sister's worried about you. Becca's always worried about me. Even when we were children, she tried to protect me from everything. Sarah tested the strength of her repair. But she can't protect me from Charles. No, Jackson agreed quietly. But we can prepare. He stood, moving to a shelf and pulling down a wooden box. Inside was a small revolver, well maintained but clearly used. Time you learned to shoot. Sarah stared at the weapon. In her old life, ladies didn't touch guns, but she wasn't that person anymore. When do we start? The lesson took place behind the barn, where Jackson had set up targets on hay bales. He showed her how to load, how to hold the gun properly, how to sight along the barrel. Breathe steady, he instructed, standing close behind her. Squeeze gently, don't pull. His presence was distracting, his hands warm as they adjusted her. Grip. The first shot went wide, making her jump despite the warning. Again, he said, you're stronger than you think. By sunset, she could hit the target more often than not. Her arms ached, her ears rang despite the cotton wadding he'd given her, but pride straightened her spine. Good work, Jackson said as they walked back to the house. We'll practice more tomorrow. Jack? She stopped, turning to face him. Why are you doing all this? Teaching me, protecting me, you barely know me. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Maybe I'm tired of being alone, he finally said. Or maybe, he met her eyes, maybe some things are worth fighting for. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to voice. But as they walked back to the house, their shoulders brushing occasionally, Sarah felt something settle in her chest, a certainty she'd never known before. Whatever Charles brought with him, she wasn't facing it alone, not anymore. The simple calico dress didn't look like much laid out on Sarah's bed, but Mrs. Rivera had worked magic with her needle, adjusting the fit until it hugged Sarah's new curves. Earned. From months of ranch work, perfectly. You don't have to go, Rebecca said, watching Sarah pin up her hair. The town dance isn't worth risking exposure. Hiding makes me look guilty, Sarah replied, securing the last pin. Besides, Jackson says showing up is important. Shows we have nothing to fear. Rebecca's reflection smiled knowingly in the mirror. Jackson says, does he? Sarah chose to ignore her sister's tone. He's right. The town's been talking anyway. Might as well give them something real to talk about. The dance was being held in the newly built town hall, its windows glowing warmly against the deepening twilight. Sarah felt the stares as Jackson helped her down from the wagon, heard the whispers behind raised hands. But with his hand steady at the small of her back, she found she didn't much care. My, Thomas Blackwood's voice cut through the general murmur. Don't you clean up nice, miss? What was your surname again? Just Sarah will do, she replied coolly, grateful for Jackson's solid presence beside her. Now, Blackwood smiled, all teeth and no warmth. Surely a lady of your background must have a proper name? She does. Rebecca stepped forward, every inch the society lady despite her simpler dress. Sarah Elizabeth Caldwell, daughter of Jonathan Caldwell of Denver, and my sister. Her smile was razor sharp. I don't believe we've been properly introduced, Mr. Blackwood's smile faltered. The Caldwell name carried weight, even out here. Thomas Blackwood, ma'am. A pleasure. Is it? Rebecca's tone suggested otherwise. Strange. I don't recall the Blackwoods being received in Denver society. Perhaps you're related to the Massachusetts branch? No? She turned dismissively. Come, Sarah, I believe I hear a waltz starting. They left Blackwood sputtering, making their way into the hall. Jackson's eyes crinkled with suppressed laughter. Remind me never to cross your sister, he murmured to Sarah. The music swelled. Couples. Taking to the floor, Sarah watched them longingly, remembering countless dancing lessons in her old life. Care to dance? Jackson's voice was soft beside her. She turned, surprised. You dance? Poorly, he admitted with a grin. But I reckon you can lead without, making it too obvious. The first steps were awkward, but they found their rhythm. Jackson might not have been trained in ballrooms, but he moved with the natural grace of someone comfortable in his own skin. Sarah found herself relaxing into his hold, letting the music carry them. People are staring, she murmured. Let them. His hand was warm against her back. Give them something worth staring at. The waltz ended too soon. As they moved to the punch table, Sarah caught fragments of conversation. Living in sin. Heard she ran from her wedding. McCall always was too soft-hearted. Jackson's jaw tightened, but Sarah squeezed his arm. They don't matter, she said softly. No, he agreed, covering her hand with his. They don't. Rebecca appeared at their side, her expression worried. Sarah, we should leave. I just overheard. The music screeched to a halt. In the doorway stood the Reverend Mills, his face grave. Brothers and sisters, his voice carried through the suddenly silent hall. I have received disturbing news about one among us, news that, if true, threatens the very moral fabric of our community. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Jackson's hand found hers, gripping tight. A telegram, the Reverend continued, from a most respected colleague in Denver, warning us about a fugitive from justice, a woman who abandoned her sacred vows, who fled from holy matrimony itself. That's not what happened. Sarah's voice rang out clear and strong, surprising even herself. The crowd parted as she stepped forward, Jackson at her side. I chose not to speak vows under false pretenses. I chose not to let myself be sold into a loveless marriage. I chose freedom. The Reverend's face darkened. The woman you were promised to was a lie. Sarah's chin lifted. The woman I am now. She's real and she's not running anymore. A murmur ran through the crowd. Sarah felt Jackson's quiet strength beside her, saw Rebecca's proud smile, noticed Mrs. Rivera's approving nod from the corner. Well, Blackwood's voice cut through the tension. Perhaps we should hear from Charles Whitmore himself. He'll be arriving any day now, I believe. Sarah's heart stumbled, but her voice remained steady. Yes, perhaps you should. He can explain how he planned to steal my inheritance, how he thought marriage gave him the right to control every aspect of my life. She looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of the other women. How many of you married for love? How many of you chose your own paths? The silence that followed felt different, thoughtful. She saw several women glance at their husbands, saw something like understanding dawn in their eyes. Come on, Jackson said quietly. I think we've given them enough to talk about for one night. Outside, the night air cooled her flushed cheeks. Jackson helped her into the wagon, his touch lingering longer than necessary. You were magnificent, he said softly. Sarah looked back at the brightly lit hall, at the life she'd left behind, at the future she was choosing. No, she replied. I was just finally being myself. The storm rolled in from the mountains like God's own fury, turning day to twilight in a matter of minutes. Sarah stood on the porch, watching the approaching wall of clouds, feeling the electric charge in the air that made her skin prickle. Get the animals secured, Jackson's voice carried over the rising wind as he strode from the barn. Storm's coming fast. The ranch hands scrambled to follow his orders, racing to bring in the closest livestock. Sarah hitched up her skirts and ran to help, ignoring Rebecca's shocked protest from the doorway. The new calf, she shouted to Jackson over the wind. She's still in the far pasture. He nodded grimly. I'll get her. I'm coming with you. Thunder cracked overhead as they rode out, the wind whipping Sarah's hair free of its pins. They found the calf huddled against a fence post, trembling but alive. Jackson dismounted smoothly, approaching the frightened animal with calm assurance. "Easy now," he murmured, getting the rope around her neck. "Sarah, there's an old Bible in my saddlebag. Grab it. We'll need shelter until this passes." The Bible was wrapped in oiled cloth, protected from the elements. As the first heavy drops began to fall, Jackson led them to a line shack, half hidden in a grove of trees. They got the calf inside, just as the sky opened. Rain drummed on the tin roof, while thunder shook the walls. Jackson lit a small lantern, its glow creating a warm circle in the rustic space. "Your sister will be beside herself," he said, checking the calf for injuries. "Becca's always beside herself about something." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in her wet clothes. Jackson shrugged out of his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The warmth of him lingered in the fabric, along with the familiar scent of leather and tobacco. "The Bible," she said, partly to distract herself from his closeness. "Why did you want it?" Jackson sat on an upturned crate, taking the wrapped book from her. "It was my mother's, one of the few things that survived the fire that took her and Pa." His fingers traced the worn leather cover. "I keep it close when I'm working the far pastures. Reminder of where I came from, I suppose." Sarah settled beside him, drawn by this rare glimpse into his past. "Tell me about them." Lightning flashed, illuminating his face as he opened the Bible. Between its pages, pressed flowers and snippets of paper created a family archive. Ma loved flowers. Had them everywhere, even though they weren't practical. Said beauty feeds the soul, same as bread feeds the body. He smiled at a dried violet. Pa thought she was impractical, but he'd ride miles to bring her wildflowers. "Like my garden," Sarah said softly. "Like your garden," he agreed, then paused at a weathered photograph. This was them, year they homesteaded here. Sarah studied the faded image, a young couple standing proud before a half-built cabin, hope bright in their eyes despite their worn clothes. "They look happy," she observed. "Were, mostly. Had their struggles, but they faced them together." Thunder rolled again as he turned the page. "Fire took them 10 years ago. I was in town when it happened, couldn't get back in time." Sarah's hand found his, squeezing gently. "Is that why you stay out here? Away from town?" "Partly." He met her eyes. "In the lantern light. Partly because some hurts take time to heal." The calf made a soft sound, drawing their attention. Sarah rose to check on her, stroking her damp coat soothingly. "You're good with her," Jackson said, watching them. "Good with all of them, really. The animals, the garden, the ranch. You've made this place better. You gave me the chance to try." She turned to face him. "No one's ever done that before." He stood, moving closer, and Sarah's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. "Sarah!" A massive thunderclap made them both jump, startling the calf. By the time they had her calmed, the moment had passed, but something had shifted between them, like earth after rain. The storm began to ease, the thunder moving off to the east. They waited until the rain softened before leading the calf home through the freshly washed world. Back at the ranch, Rebecca fussed, and Mrs. Rivera clucked over their wet clothes, but Sarah hardly noticed. She was too busy watching Jackson as he cared for their horses, seeing him with new eyes, understanding finally that some storms change more than just the landscape. The telegram arrived on a golden afternoon when the air was sweet with fresh-cut hay. Sarah was helping Mrs. Rivera hang laundry, taking simple pleasure in watching the sheets billow like sails in the warm breeze. Rebecca sat nearby in the shade, reading a week-old newspaper from Denver. Tommy Wilson's arrival on his father's fastest. "Horse shattered the peace. Mr. McCall," the boy called, waving a yellow envelope. "Urgent wire from Denver." Sarah's hands froze on the sheet she was pinning. Rebecca dropped her newspaper. Even Mrs. Rivera stopped her work, making the sign of the cross. Jackson emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He took the telegram, pressed a coin into Tommy's palm, and waited until the boy had ridden away before opening it. His face gave nothing away as he read, but Sarah knew. She'd been expecting this moment since Rebecca's arrival, had seen it coming like storm clouds on the horizon. "He's coming," she said. It wasn't a question. Jackson nodded, holding out the telegram. Sarah forced herself to read the words that would shatter her peace. Arriving Rivers Bend. Stop Friday. Next stop bring legal representatives. Stop matters to be settled. Stop resistance. Futile. Stop Charles Whitmore. 4 days, Rebecca said softly. "We have 4 days." Sarah's fingers crumpled the telegram. "He's so sure of himself. Resistance futile. As if I'm some wayward child to be collected and corrected. You're not." Jackson's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "You're a free woman on free land." "The law," Rebecca began. "The law out here isn't like Denver," Jackson got in. "A woman can own property, run businesses. Sarah's been working this land, drawing wages. She's established herself as an independent person." Mrs. Rivera gathered up her laundry basket. "I will pray to Santa Maria," she said firmly, "and then I will write to my cousin Miguel. He is lawyer in Santa Fe." Sarah watched the older woman stride toward the house, her back straight with purpose. "I don't want to cause trouble for any of you." "Trouble's already here," Jackson replied. "Question is, how do we face it?" Rebecca stood, brushing off her skirts. "First, we need to understand exactly what legal claims Charles might have. I'll ride into town, send some inquiries to my contacts in Denver." "I'll go with you," Jackson said. "Need to speak with Judge Harrison anyway." They began walking toward the barn, discussing strategies, but Sarah remained by the laundry line. The sheet she'd been hanging fluttered against her face, smelling of sunshine and clean cotton. Simple things, real things. "Sarah?" Jackson had turned back, watching her with concern. "You all right?" "I was happy," she said softly. "For the first time in my life, I was truly happy." He crossed back to her in 3 long strides. His hand came up, calloused fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face with surprising gentleness. "You will be again," he promised. "We'll fight this." She leaned into his touch just slightly. "We?" "Yes." His voice was rough. "We." The sound of Rebecca clearing her throat broke the moment. Jackson stepped back, but his eyes held Sarah's for a heartbeat longer. "We should go," Rebecca said, not quite hiding her smile. "Before the telegraph office closes." They rode out, leaving Sarah with Mrs. Rivera and the ranch hands. She threw herself into work, trying to keep her mind off the future. But every task reminded her of what she stood to lose. The garden she'd planted, now lush with summer growth. The kitchen where Mrs. Rivera had taught her to make tortillas and traditional medicines. The barn where she'd learned to birth calves and doctor injured horses. The porch where she and Jackson often sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set. More than that, the person she'd become here. Strong, capable, free. By sunset, she'd made her decision. When Jackson and Rebecca returned, she was waiting on the porch, her mother's locket, the only valuable thing she'd brought from her old life, in her hands. "Sell it," she said as they dismounted. "Use it for legal fees. I want to fight." Jackson studied her face in the fading light. "You're sure?" "This is my home now." She lifted her chin. "And I'm done letting Charles Whitmore decide my fate." Rebecca took the locket, weighing it in her palm. "It's worth something, but Charles has considerable resources." "Then we'll find other resources," Sarah said firmly. "You said the law here is different, that women can own property?" She turned to Jackson. "Teach me everything, every legal right, every territorial statute. If I'm going to fight for my freedom, I need to understand exactly what I'm fighting for." Jackson's smile was slow but fierce. "Thought you'd never ask." They worked late into the night. Rebecca's society connections and Jackson's practical knowledge combining with Sarah's determination. Mrs. Rivera brought them coffee and her cousin's legal texts, adding her own wisdom about frontier law. When they finally stopped, The moon was high and the kitchen table was covered with notes and plans. Rebecca had dozed off in her chair, and Mrs. Rivera had long since gone to bed. Sarah stood at the window, watching moonlight silver the familiar landscape. Jackson joined her, his presence solid and reassuring at her side. "Charles won't give up easily," she said quietly. "No," Jackson agreed, "but neither will we." She turned to face him. "Why? Why risk everything to help me?" In the moonlight, his eyes were dark and serious. "Because some things are worth risking everything for." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was ready to voice. But as Sarah headed up to bed, her mother's locket left behind as a promise of battles to come, she felt stronger than she had in days. Charles was coming, but he wouldn't find the same woman who had fled from him in a borrowed wedding dress. He would find someone altogether different, someone who had learned to fight for what she loved. The deed to the McCall ranch lay open on Judge Harrison's desk, its edges worn with age, but its text still clear. Sarah traced the boundaries drawn there, remembering every fence line and creek bed she'd come to know over the past months. "It's simple enough," Judge Harrison said, adjusting his spectacles. "As Mr. McCall's employed ranch hand, with documented wages and residence, you have certain rights under territorial law. Mr. Whitmore cannot simply arrive and remove you against your will." "He'll try," Rebecca warned from her seat by the window. "Charles isn't used to hearing no." "Then he'll learn," Jackson said quietly. His hand rested on the back of Sarah's chair, a steady presence. The judge's office door burst open, revealing Thomas Blackwood with a telegram in his hand. "Judge, you need to—" He stopped short at the sight of them. "Well, isn't this cozy?" "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said coldly, "this is a private meeting." "Private?" Blackwood's smile was sharp. "Nothing about this situation is private. Not with Charles Whitmore and Jonathan Caldwell arriving tomorrow with enough lawyers to fill a train car." Sarah felt Jackson tense behind her. "How do you know that?" Blackwood waved the telegram. "Mr. Whitmore and I have been corresponding. He's very interested in my observations about his runaway bride's situation here." "You've been spying for him," Rebecca realized, disgust clear in her voice. "I prefer to think of it as protecting the moral integrity of our community." Blackwood's eyes fixed on Sarah. "Did you really think you could hide here forever, playing at being a ranch hand, corrupting decent people with your presence?" "That's enough." Jackson stepped forward, but Sarah caught his arm. "No," she said, standing. "Let him speak. I want to hear exactly what Mr. Blackwood thinks he knows about morality." Something in her tone made Blackwood step back. "Now see here. Tell me, Mr. Blackwood, is it moral to sell a daughter to pay gambling debts, to use marriage as a weapon, to strike a woman for daring to question her cage?" Her voice never rose, but each word carried the weight of truth. "Because that's what Charles Whitmore calls morality." Silence fell in the judge's office. Even Rebecca looked shocked at the revelations. "Sarah," she whispered, "you never said, because it doesn't matter anymore." Sarah squared her shoulders. "What matters is who I am now, what I've built here." Judge Harrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Blackwood, I believe we're done here, and I'd advise you to consider very carefully whose side you're taking in this matter." "The law," Blackwood began. "The law," the judge cut in, "protects property rights, and Miss Caldwell has established legal residence and employment on this ranch. Any attempt to remove her by force would be problematic." Blackwood's face darkened. "We'll see what Mr. Whitmore has to say about that." He stormed out, letting the door slam behind him. Sarah sank back into her chair, trembling slightly. Jackson's hand found her shoulder, squeezing gently. "Well," Rebecca said after a moment, "that was illuminating." "Indeed." Judge Harrison began gathering papers. "Miss Caldwell, I suggest you return to the ranch and prepare for tomorrow. I'll have the necessary documents ready by morning." Outside, the town was buzzing with activity. News of Charles's imminent arrival had spread, drawing curious onlookers and gossips. "Head back without me," Jackson said as they reached the horses. "I need to speak with some people." "Jack," Sarah started. "Trust me," he said softly. "There. Eyes met, held. Always," she replied. The ride back to the ranch was tense, Rebecca unusually quiet beside her. Finally, her sister spoke. "Why didn't you tell me? About Charles? About what he did?" Sarah guided her horse around a rough patch. "Would it have changed anything? Father had already made his choice. I would have helped you. You are helping me." Sarah smiled at her sister. "Right now, when it matters most." They crested the last hill before the ranch, and Sarah pulled her horse to a stop. Below, Mrs. Rivera was directing ranch hands in what appeared to be a fortification effort. Extra hands from neighboring ranches had appeared, helping to repair fences and secure buildings. "What in the world?" Rebecca breathed. Sarah recognized some of the faces. Men and women who'd been at the dance, who'd heard her speak her truth. They'd come to help, to stand with her. "This is what Charles doesn't understand," she said softly. "In Denver, he could control the story, make people see what he wanted them to see. But out here, people judge you by what you do, not what others say about you." When Jackson returned at sunset, he brought news. The sheriff had deputized extra men to keep peace in town. The telegraph operator had agreed to send copies of all Blackwood's communications to the judge. And most importantly, the town council had voted to support Sarah's right to stay. "They remember how this land was built," Jackson said as they sat on the porch that evening. "By people who chose to break with their past and start fresh. People like you." Sarah looked out at the ranch, her home, where lanterns flickered as the extra hands bedded down in the barn. "Like us, you mean?" His. And found hers in the gathering dark. "Yes, like us. Tomorrow would bring Charles and his lawyers, threats and demands. But tonight, surrounded by people who had chosen to stand with her, Sarah felt nothing but peace. She was exactly where she belonged. The first jar of preserved peaches glowed like captured sunlight on Mrs. Rivera's kitchen shelf. Sarah stepped back to admire her work, satisfaction warming her chest. Her hands might be scratched and stained, but the neat rows of jars represented something she'd never had in her old life, the ability to provide for herself. "Beautiful," Mrs. Rivera approved, adding another jar to the collection. "Your seal is perfect. These will taste like summer when the snow flies." Sarah smiled, remembering how her first attempts at canning had been less successful. "I had a good teacher. You had willing hands and an open heart." Mrs. Rivera wiped her hands on her apron. "Sometimes that is all we need to build a new life." The kitchen door opened, bringing a burst of autumn air, and Rebecca, her arms full of fresh vegetables. "From the garden. The tomatoes are coming in faster than we can pick them," she announced, setting down her harvest. Gone were her fine dresses and city airs. Weeks of ranch life had transformed her almost as much as they had Sarah. "Perfect timing," Mrs. Rivera said. "We'll start the sauce next, but first..." She pulled a letter from her pocket. Word from Miguel. Sarah's heart jumped. The lawyers' letters had become their lifeline to the larger legal battle brewing in Denver. Charles had retreated but not surrendered, using his influence to challenge Sarah's independence through the courts. "What does he say?" Mrs. Rivera's eyes scanned the Spanish text. "He says Charles's petition to have you declared mentally incompetent has been denied." The judge was not impressed by Dr. Morton's diagnosis of feminine hysteria. Rebecca snorted. "That's because Dr. Morton diagnoses every independent woman with hysteria. He tried the same with me when I refused the Andrews boy." A knock at the door interrupted them. Jackson stood there, his expression unreadable. "Sarah, got something to show you?" She followed him to the barn, curious. Inside, he led her to an empty stall that had been cleared and cleaned. "Thought you might want to set up your own canning space here," he said. "More room than the kitchen. Could add some shelves, maybe a work table." Sarah stared at the space, seeing the possibilities. "My own preserve room?" if you want it. He shifted, almost nervous. Figured since you're staying. Am I? She turned to face him. Staying? His eyes met hers, serious. I hope so. Ranch needs you. The garden, the preserves, the books you've organized. He paused. I need you. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest. Jack, a commotion. Outside broke the moment. They hurried out to find one of the ranch hands riding in fast. Riders coming, he called. Looks like the Whitmore bunch from town. Jackson's face hardened. How many? 4, maybe 5. That fancy lawyer's with them. Sarah squared her shoulders. I'll change. No. Jackson caught her arm. Let them see you exactly as you are, covered in peach juice and all. She understood. This was who she was now. A woman who worked with her hands, who built things, who belonged. The riders approached the ranch house in a cloud of dust. Charles's lawyer, Mr. Patterson, led the group, his city clothes absurdly out of place. Miss Caldwell, he called, dismounting, we have a proposition for you. Mrs. Rivera, Sarah called over her shoulder, would you fetch the deed papers, please? And Rebecca, perhaps you'd like to take notes? The lawyer blinked, clearly thrown by her calm authority. This is a private matter. Nothing about my life is private anymore, Mr. Patterson. Your client saw to that. She gestured to the porch. Shall we discuss this proposition of yours? They settled on the porch, Sarah flanked by Jackson and Rebecca, Mrs. Rivera standing guard at the door. The ranch hands casually positioned themselves within earshot, making it clear whose land this was. Patterson cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore is prepared to be generous. He'll withdraw all legal challenges, provide a generous settlement. If you'll simply return to Denver? Sarah's laugh held no humor. Become his proper wife? Let him control my mother's inheritance? Be reasonable, Miss Caldwell. A woman in your position, my position, Sarah gestured to the ranch around them. My position is that of a free woman on free land. I earn my own wages, preserve my own food, and choose my own path. She leaned forward. What exactly is Mr. Whitmore offering that could possibly be worth giving that up? The lawyer fumbled with his papers. The settlement is declined. Sarah stood. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have peaches to preserve. Winter's coming, and this ranch needs its stores. After they'd ridden away, Jackson found her back in the kitchen, methodically filling jars with golden fruit. You know they'll try again, he said softly. Sarah nodded, sealing another jar with practiced movements. And I'll refuse again, and again, as many times as it takes. He moved closer, watching her work. What you said out there, about choosing your own path, he paused. Does that path have room for someone else? She set down her jar, turned to face him. Depends on whether that someone else is willing to walk beside me, not in front of me. His smile was slow and warm. Beside you. Sounds perfect. The first snow fell early that year, dusting the mountains with white and sending a clear message. Winter wasn't waiting for anyone's permission. Sarah stood at her bedroom window, watching her breath fog the glass as she stitched the final piece of her first quilt. The fabric pieces had come from everywhere. One of Mrs. Rivera's old aprons, Rebecca's ruined silk traveling dress, even a few squares from Jackson's worn work shirts. Like her new life, it was made of cast-offs and remnants, yet somehow the pattern made sense. It's beautiful, Rebecca said from the doorway. Though I still can't believe you cut up my favorite dress. It was beyond saving after you fell in. The pig pen. Sarah tied off her thread. Besides, this way it's useful. Like you. Rebecca sat beside her sister. I got another letter from Father today. Sarah's hands stilled on the quilt. And? He's softening. Seeing Charles's true nature finally. Rebecca touched one of the silk squares. He asks if you're happy. What did you tell him? I told him to come see for himself. Sarah looked out at the snow-dusted ranch, at the life she'd built here. Will he come? Eventually. When his pride bends enough, Rebecca smiled. Though I'm not sure he's ready to meet his future son-in-law. Rebecca! Sarah felt her cheeks warm. We haven't. Please, I've seen how he looks at you, how you look at him. Rebecca stood, straightening her work dress, so different from her Denver finery. Life's too short and winters are too cold to waste time pretending. As if to emphasize her point, a gust of wind rattled the window panes. Below, Jackson and the ranch hands were reinforcing the barn doors against the coming storms. It's not that simple, Sarah protested, isn't it? You love him. He loves you. The ranch is prospering. Charles's lawyers are running out of challenges. Rebecca lifted the finished quilt, letting it unfold. Sometimes happiness is as simple as putting the pieces together and seeing the pattern they make. Sarah watched Jackson direct the men, his movements sure and strong. He looked up, catching her at the window, and touched his hat brim in greeting. Such a small gesture, but it warmed her more than any quilt could. The sound of horses drew their attention. Through the swirling snow, they saw Mrs. Rivera's cousin Miguel approaching, his lawyer's satchel strapped to his saddle. News from Denver, Rebecca said quietly. They gathered in the kitchen, where Mrs. Rivera served coffee and her famous biscuits, while Miguel laid out papers on the table. Charles Whitmore has played his last card, Miguel announced, his accent thick but his English precise. He attempted to claim that your marriage was legally binding because vows were partially spoken. Sarah's hands clenched around her coffee cup. And? Miguel's smile was triumphant. The territorial judge ruled that a marriage ceremony must be completed willingly by both parties. Your objection, witnessed by the entire church, makes the ceremony null and void. So it's over. Rebecca leaned forward. Charles has no more legal claims? He has no more legal claims, no more social leverage, and Miguel's smile widened. No more money to pursue this? His obsession with this case has cost him dearly among Denver's elite. Sarah sat back, feeling lighter than she had in months. Through the kitchen window, she could see Jackson still working in the snow, building something solid and real. There's one more thing, Miguel added, pulling out a final document. Your father has released your mother's inheritance to you, completely. No conditions, no controls. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. He's letting go. See. Miguel squeezed her hand. You are truly free now, Nina. Free to choose your own path. That evening, after Miguel had gone to town and Rebecca and Mrs. Rivera had retired, Sarah found Jackson in the barn. He was checking the animals one last time, his movements gentle with the pregnant mare. You'll catch cold out here, he said without turning. I finished my quilt today. She stepped closer, watching his hands move over the mare's flank. My first one. Quite an accomplishment. Yes. She took a deep breath. I'm free now, legally, completely. His hands stilled. Slowly, he turned to face her. I know you probably have plans, he said carefully. Your inheritance, your freedom. You could go anywhere, do anything. I could. She moved closer still. Is that what you want? For me to go? Sarah. Her name was rough in his throat. You know it's not. Then ask me to stay. The mare nickered softly, but neither of them moved. Stay, Jackson whispered. Not as my ranch hand. Not as someone who needs shelter. Stay because I love you. The words fell between them like snow, soft but transformative. Because this place hasn't been just a ranch since you came. It's been a home. Sarah closed the distance between them, her hand finding his cheek. Then I'll stay. Because I love you too. Because somehow running away from a false marriage led me to a true one. His kiss tasted of snow and coffee and promise. Outside, winter settled over the ranch like a quilt, each piece fitting perfectly into place. The old trunk in Jackson's attic yielded unexpected treasures. Sarah and Mrs. Rivera carefully unpacked delicate glass ornaments, their colors still bright despite years of storage. Each one came with a story, which Jackson shared as they decorated the pine tree he'd brought. Down from the mountains. Ma bought these in St. Louis, he said, holding up a delicate blue bird. Saved egg money for months. Pa thought she was crazy, spending good money on glass that only came out once a year. But he helped her pack them away each January. Mrs. Rivera added, smiling at the memory. So careful, like they were made of gold. Sarah hung the bird on a high branch, imagining Jackson's mother doing the same all those years ago. They're beautiful. Thank you for sharing them. His hand brushed hers as he passed her another ornament. Since their declaration in the barn. 2 weeks ago, such touches had become more frequent, more deliberate. Each one sent warmth spreading through her chest. Rebecca entered, stomping snow from her boots. The last of the Christmas packages arrived from Denver. She set a large crate on the table. And a letter from Father. Sarah tensed slightly, but Jackson's hand found the small of her back, steadying her. The letter was shorter than expected. My dear daughters, your last letters have given me much to consider. Perhaps I have been too rigid, too concerned with appearance over substance. Rebecca tells me the ranch is prospering under your care, Sarah, and that you have found not just sanctuary but purpose there. I would like to see this for myself if you are amenable. Rebecca mentions Christmas celebrations. Would there be room for an old fool who is learning, too late perhaps, that his daughter's happiness matters more than his pride? With love and hope, Father Sarah read it twice, her hands trembling slightly. He wants to come for Christmas. Si bueno, Mrs. Rivera said firmly. A father should be with his children at Christmas. I will make extra tamales. Are you sure? Rebecca asked Sarah. We can tell him it's too soon. Sarah looked around the room, at the tree decorated with Jackson's family memories, at Mrs. Rivera rolling out dough for her traditional Christmas cookies, at the home she'd helped build from the ashes of her old life. No, she said slowly, it's time. He should see who I've become, who we've all become. Jackson squeezed her hand. I'll have the boys clear out the east bedroom. The next few days passed in a whirl of preparation. Sarah and Mrs. Rivera decorated every window with pine boughs and red ribbons. Rebecca taught the ranch hands to make paper chains, turning the evenings into impromptu gatherings filled with stories and laughter. Sarah found Jackson in the workshop one evening, carefully sanding a small wooden box. What's that? He quickly covered it. Nothing, just a project. She raised an eyebrow but didn't press. They all had their Christmas secrets now. The sound of sleigh bells brought them all outside 3 days before Christmas. Jonathan Caldwell sat stiffly in the rented sleigh, looking both regal and uncertain in his city clothes. Sarah stepped forward. Welcome to Circle M Ranch, Father. He stared at her for a long moment, taking in her practical dress, her confident stance, the way Jackson stood supportively at her shoulder. Sarah, his voice cracked slightly. You look well. I am well. She smiled. Come inside. Mrs. Rivera's made hot chocolate. Over steaming cups rich with Mexican chocolate and cinnamon, the awkwardness slowly melted. Jonathan listened as Sarah described the ranch's operations, asked intelligent questions about the breeding program Jackson was developing, and watched with growing understanding as his daughter moved confidently through this new world she'd created. You've built something remarkable here, he said that evening as they sat around the fire. All of you? We have, Sarah agreed, leaning slightly against Jackson's shoulder. It's not the life you planned for me. No. Jonathan smiled sadly. It's better. It's real. He cleared his throat. I brought something for you. Originally, I thought to give it at your wedding, but he withdrew a small package from his coat. Inside was a miniature portrait of Sarah's mother, painted in her youth. She would have understood, Jonathan said softly. She would have been proud of your courage. Sarah clutched the portrait, tears threatening. Jackson's arm slipped around her shoulders, and her father's expression softened further at the natural gesture. Mr. McCall, he said formally, I believe you and I should have a conversation tomorrow. Yes, sir, Jackson replied. I believe we should. Sarah looked between them, love for both men making her heart full. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside was warm with the light of new beginnings and old hurts healing. Christmas was coming to the Circle M Ranch, bringing with it the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that family, like love, could be both chosen and earned. The legal documents arrived on a bitter January morning, carried by a grim-faced Miguel who had ridden through the night to deliver them. Sarah read them at the kitchen table, the familiar sense of coffee and fresh bread, now failing to provide their usual comfort. "He's claiming what?" Rebecca demanded, reading over her shoulder. "That Jackson coerced me." Sarah's voice was steady despite her shock. "That he conspired to interfere with a legal contract by harboring me here. He's suing for damages." Jackson stood by the window, his stance deceptively casual. "How much?" "Enough to take the ranch." Sarah met his eyes. "Charles knows he can't force me to marry him anymore, so he's trying to destroy everything we've built instead." Mrs. Rivera muttered something in Spanish that made Miguel cross himself. "The allegations are ridiculous," Miguel said, spreading more papers across the table. "But Whitmore has hired the territory's most aggressive law firm. They'll drag this through every court they can find, using Jackson's past against him," Sarah added quietly. She'd learned about his wilder years during their evening conversations. The bar fights, the gambling debts he'd long since paid off. "They're painting him as a man who preys on vulnerable women." "Let them try," Rebecca said fiercely. "We'll get father's lawyers involved. The whole Denver social circle knows what Charles is really like now." But Sarah was watching Jackson, seeing the muscle tick in his jaw. "Jack, might be best if you stayed in town for a while," he said carefully, "with Rebecca, until this blows over." "No." Sarah stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "That's exactly what Charles wants, to separate us, to make it look like there's something to hide." "Sarah, no." She crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. "I won't let him destroy this, not when we fought so hard to build it." Miguel cleared his throat. "There might be another way." He pulled out another document. "If you were already married." "A marriage of convenience?" Rebecca asked. "Would that help?" "Not convenience," Sarah said, still holding Jackson's gaze. "Love." The kitchen fell silent. Even Mrs. Rivera stopped her nervous cleaning to watch them. "Sarah," Jackson's voice was rough, "this isn't how I wanted to ask. I had plans. The wooden box you've been working on?" She smiled. "I knew it was a ring box." His laugh was shaky. "Wanted to do it proper. Give you the choice, not force your hand." "You did give me the choice. Every day since I arrived you've given me nothing but choices." She squeezed his hands. "So now I'm choosing this, choosing you. Unless you don't want." His kiss cut off her words, drawing. A whoop from Rebecca and an "Ay, Dios mío" from Mrs. Rivera. "I want," he said when they parted. "God, Sarah, I want everything with you." Miguel was already pulling out more papers. "We can have the license today. Judge Harrison owes me a favor. He'll perform the ceremony whenever you're ready." "Tomorrow," Sarah said firmly. "Let me send for father. He should be here this time." Jackson touched her cheek. "You're sure? Really sure?" She thought of the frightened bride she'd been, running from a loveless marriage arranged for money and status. Thought of how far she'd come, how much she'd grown. "I've never been more sure of anything." The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations. Telegrams were sent, plans were made. Rebecca rode into town to spread the news, returning with fabric for a simple wedding dress and stories of Charles's lawyer's frustration at being outmaneuvered. That evening, Sarah found Jackson on their porch, smoking his pipe and watching the sunset paint the snow-covered mountains. "Having second thoughts?" she asked, settling beside him. "About marrying you? Never." He offered her his coat as she shivered. "About bringing you into this legal fight every minute?" "Jack." She turned his face to hers. "I'm already in this fight. Have been since the day you opened your door to a runaway bride. The only difference is now we'll face it together, legally and in every other way." He pulled out the wooden box she'd spotted him working on. meant to do this proper, on one knee with pretty words. This is proper. She watched him open the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a small pearl. This is us. Belonged to my mother, he said softly. Pa traded 2 of his best horses for it. Said she was worth more, but it was all he could afford. Sarah held out her hand, letting him slip the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. Tell me a story, she said, settling against his shoulder. About your parents, about the life they built here. As the sun set and the stars began to emerge, Jackson's voice painted pictures of the past while their breath mingled in the cold air. Tomorrow would bring a wedding, a new legal battle, and whatever else Charles threw at them. But tonight was for this: quiet love, shared stories, and the certainty that sometimes running away can lead you straight home. Sheriff Mason's badge caught the morning light as he rode up to the ranch house, his expression grave. Sarah met him. On the porch, her mother's ring warm and reassuring on her finger. Miss Caldwell. Mrs. McCall now, I hear. Congratulations. He removed his hat. Thought you should know. Charles Whitmore arrived in town an hour ago. Got a whole team of lawyers. With him. We expected as much, Sarah replied. Thank you for the warning. There's more. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. He's filed for an emergency injunction against your marriage. Claims you're not of sound mind to enter into any legal contracts. From inside, she heard Jackson's sharp intake of breath. They'd known this was coming, but the reality still stung. When's the hearing? Jackson asked, joining them. This afternoon. Judge Harrison's none too pleased about being rushed, but the sheriff shrugged. Whitmore's lawyers are pushing hard. Sarah straightened her spine. Then we'll be ready. The town was buzzing when they rode in, crowds gathering to watch the drama unfold. Sarah sat tall in her saddle, refusing to shrink under the stairs. Jackson rode beside her, with Rebecca and her father following close behind. Mrs. Rivera had stayed at the ranch, promising to light candles and pray. Outside the courthouse, Thomas Blackwood waited with Charles and his lawyers. Sarah's first sight of her former fiancé showed how much he'd changed. His face was harder, his elegant clothes unable to hide the bitterness in his eyes. Sarah! His voice carried across the street. Still playing at being a rancher's wife? Not playing, Charles. She dismounted smoothly, a far cry from the sheltered city girl she'd once been. Living, building, loving. His face darkened. You have no idea what you've cost me, my freedom. She met his gaze steadily. It was never yours to sell. The courthouse filled quickly. It seemed the entire town had turned out to witness the proceedings. To Sarah's surprise, many faces showed support rather than judgment. The banker's wife who'd once snubbed her now offered an encouraging smile. The general store owner's daughters saved seats for Rebecca and her father. Judge Harrison entered, his face stern. Let's get one thing straight, he announced before anyone could speak. This is not Denver. We do things differently here. Charles's lead lawyer stood, papers in hand. Your Honor, we have documentation proving Miss Caldwell's history of unstable behavior. Mrs. McCall, the judge corrected, and I'm more interested in hearing from her directly. He turned to Sarah. Young lady, are you being coerced in any way? Sarah stood, her voice clear and strong. No, Your Honor. Every choice I've made since coming here has been my own, including running from a legal contract, Charles interrupted. Objection, Miguel called from their table. Mr. Whitmore is not recognized by the court. Sustained. The judge glared at Charles. Mr. Whitmore, you'll have your turn. What followed was a parade of witnesses. Town doctor confirming Sarah's sound mind, ranch hands testifying to her hard work and capability, even Mrs. Harrison describing how Sarah had transformed the McCall Ranch into a prosperous operation. But it was the sheriff's testimony that turned the tide. I've been lawman here 15 years, he said gruffly. Seen all kinds of folk come through. The McCall Ranch was always good land, but it's something special now. That's down to her. He pointed at Sarah. Lady like that, who can turn a struggling... A ranch into a real home. Ain't nothing unstable about that. Charles's lawyers tried to paint Jackson as a predator, but each attack was met with community support. The saloon keeper told how Jackson had helped him through drought years. The minister's wife described his quiet donations to families in need. Finally, Sarah's father stood to speak. "I made a terrible mistake," Jonathan Caldwell admitted. "I tried to sell my daughter's happiness for financial gain, but she was stronger than my weakness. She found her own path, her own love." He turned to Sarah. "I've never been prouder." Charles stood abruptly. "This is absurd. She was mine." "No, Charles." Sarah's voice cut through his rage. "I was never yours. You wanted to own me, control me. But love isn't about ownership. It's about growth, about becoming more together than you could be alone." She reached for Jackson's hand. "That's what I found here. Not just safety or success, but partnership, real love." Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like thunder. "I've heard enough. The injunction is denied." Furthermore, he fixed Charles with a stern look. "Any further legal harassment of the McCalls will be considered contempt of court. This territory protects its own, Mr. Whitmore. I suggest you remember that." The courthouse erupted in cheers. Sarah felt Jackson's arms wrap around her, felt Rebecca's tears of joy against her cheek, saw her father shaking hands with Miguel. Outside, Charles waited by his carriage. "This isn't over," he warned. "Yes," Sarah said simply. "It is." She turned away from him for the last time, toward her family, her community, her home. Behind her, she heard his carriage pull away, taking the last shadows of her old life with it. Spring came to the Circle M Ranch like a promise kept, melting winter's grip and revealing the green life beneath. Sarah stood in her garden, now expanded to twice its original size, planning the season's plantings. The engagement ring on her finger, the one Jackson had crafted so carefully, caught the morning light as she worked. The carrots should go. "Here," she told Mrs. Rivera, who was helping her mark out rows. "And maybe expand the herb garden along this fence?" The trading post owner said he'd buy any extra we can dry. Sigh, and the new roses there. Mrs. Rivera pointed to a sunny corner. "Every ranch needs beauty, not just usefulness," Sarah smiled, remembering Jackson's mother's flowers. "Both, I think. Beauty and usefulness together." The sound of hooves drew their attention. Jackson rode in with several ranch hands, their horses carrying fresh-cut fence posts. The spring melt had damaged several boundary fences, but Sarah saw it as an opportunity, a chance to expand, to build something new. "Ladies," Jackson called, dismounting. He was spattered with mud, but grinning. "Found something you might want to see." He led them to the barn, where a new calf lay in the straw, pure white except for a perfect heart-shaped mark on its forehead. "Born this morning," he said proudly. "First of the spring calving. Thought you might want to name this one." Sarah knelt beside the calf, stroking its soft head. "Hope," she said after a moment. "Let's call her Hope." The name felt right, like so many. Things did now. The ranch was thriving, their marriage was strong, and even Rebecca had found her place, taking charge of their growing business dealings with surprising skill. Later that evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains, Jackson pulled out a letter. "Came from the bank today," he said, passing it to her. "They've approved the loan for the new breeding program." Sarah read through the terms, pride warming her chest. Their careful bookkeeping and growing reputation had paid off. "This means we can buy those Hereford bulls you've been eyeing and expand the north pasture." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her ring. "Build something lasting for our future." The word future hung between them, full of possibility. Sarah thought of the symptoms she'd been carefully tracking, the subtle changes she hadn't mentioned yet. Soon, she would tell him about the new life growing inside her, about the family they'd created together. But for now, she simply leaned against his shoulder, content in the peace they'd fought so hard to win. "I got another letter from Father," she said after a while. He's thinking of buying the old Stevens place. Jackson raised an eyebrow. That's just over the ridge. Says he's tired of city life, wants to try his hand at ranching. She smiled. Though I suspect he mostly wants to be closer to his future grandchildren. Jackson's hand tightened on hers. Sarah, are you saying... Not yet, she said, softly. But soon, I think, when the time is right. His kiss tasted of coffee and promise, of dreams shared and battles won together. A commotion from the bunkhouse interrupted them, laughter and the sound of a fiddle being tuned. The ranch hands had started having impromptu music sessions in the evenings, a tradition Sarah encouraged. Dance with me. Jackson stood, offering his hand. Here, now, why not? It's our porch. The fiddle began a slow waltz, and Sarah stepped into her husband's arms. They moved together under the emerging stars, their shadows blending on the weathered. The boards of the home they'd built. Remember that first dance, she asked, at the town social? You were so brave that night, facing down the gossips, standing your ground. I wasn't brave. She rested her head on his shoulder. I just knew what I was fighting for. The music drifted around them, mixing with the evening sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing softly, horses nickering in the barn, the distant call of a night bird. Simple sounds, real sounds, the soundtrack of a life chosen, not imposed. I love you, Jackson said softly, more every day. Sarah thought of the frightened bride she'd been, running from a false future toward an unknown horizon. Thought of how that desperate flight had led her here, to this man, this ranch, this life. I love you too, she whispered. Thank you for opening your door that night. Thank you for staying. They danced until the stars were bright overhead, until Mrs. Rivera called them in for supper, until the fiddle player switched to a livelier tune that had the ranch hands dancing in the yard. Spring was truly here, bringing with it all the promise of new beginnings. Just like that first spring, when a broken bride had found healing in a stranger's kindness, in honest work, in real love. But she wasn't broken anymore. She was whole, strong, loved, ready for whatever the future might bring, as long as she could. Face it with Jackson by her side, the wedding dress hung in the morning light, simple and elegant in its honesty. No borrowed finery this time, no elaborate lace or imported silk. Sarah had chosen plain white cotton, transformed by Mrs. Rivera's skilled needlework into something both practical and beautiful, like the life she'd built here. It's perfect, Rebecca said, helping Sarah with the buttons. You're perfect. Through the window, Sarah could see the ranch coming alive with preparation. Ranch hands strung lanterns between the trees, their wives and children setting up tables laden with food. The whole community had turned out, bringing dishes and decorations, turning the simple ceremony into a celebration of love and perseverance. I never thought I'd wear white again, Sarah admitted, touching the fabric softly. After running from that first wedding... That wasn't a wedding, her father said from the doorway. That was a business transaction. He stepped into the room, his eyes bright with unshed tears. This is a marriage. Sarah turned to face him, seeing in his expression all the growth they'd both achieved. Thank you, Father, for understanding, for being here. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like. He offered his arm. Ready? The ceremony was to be held in the garden Sarah had planted, now bursting with spring blooms. As she walked down the path on her father's arm, she saw faces that had become family. Mrs. Rivera wiping tears with her apron, Miguel beaming proudly, the sheriff and his wife, ranch hands and townspeople who had stood with them through every challenge, and Jackson, waiting beneath an arch of wildflowers, looking at her like she was the sunrise after the longest night. Judge Harrison stood ready to perform the ceremony, but first he addressed the gathered crowd. Some of you were here months ago when we faced down those who would deny these two their happiness. Today, we celebrate not just their love, but the triumph of truth over lies, of real devotion, over empty promises. Sarah barely heard the rest of his words lost in Jackson's eyes. When it came time for their vows, they spoke from the heart, no written words needed. "Sarah," Jackson's voice was rough with emotion, "you came to my door as a stranger, but you walked straight into my heart. You've made this ranch a home, made my life complete. I promise to love you, support you, stand beside you, never in front of you for all our days." Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks as she responded. "Jackson, you gave me shelter when I was lost, but more than that, you gave me the freedom to find myself, to become strong, to build something real. I promise to love you, to face every challenge with you, to make each day an adventure we share together." Their kiss tasted of joy and triumph, of battles won and peace earned. The crowd's cheers were deafening, led by Rebecca's enthusiastic whooping. The celebration lasted well into the night. Tables groaned with Mrs. Rivera's Mexican dishes alongside traditional American fare. The ranch hands played their fiddles, while children danced, and older couples remembered their own courting days. As evening fell, Sarah found a quiet moment with Jackson on their porch, watching their community celebrate. "Happy?" he asked, his arm warm around her waist, more than I knew was possible. She touched her stomach, where their secret was just beginning to show. "We're happy." His hand covered hers, wonder spreading across his face. "Really? Really?" She smiled up at him. "I think she'll arrive with the winter snows." "She?" "Just a feeling." Jackson pulled her closer, his kiss tender with promise. "I love you, Mrs. McCall." "I love you too, Mr. McCall." From the yard, someone called for the newly married couple to dance. They joined their guests under the lantern light, moving together as naturally as breathing. "You know," Sarah said as they danced, "when I ran away that first time, I thought I was running from marriage itself. I didn't understand that real marriage, real love, sets you free. And now," she looked around at their home, their family, the life they'd built together. "Now I understand that sometimes you have to run away from the wrong thing to find the right one." The music played on, the stars came out, and Sarah danced in her husband's arms, surrounded by the love of their chosen family. She was no longer the broken bride who had appeared on his doorstep. She was whole, strong, beloved, and finally, completely home. 1 year later, the family portrait sat on the mantel, catching the late afternoon sun. Sarah smiled at the image, Jackson holding their infant daughter Grace, her own face tired but radiant just days after the birth, Mrs. Rivera and Rebecca hovering proudly in the background. Even her father had made it for the photograph, his face beaming with grandfatherly pride. "Mama!" Grace's voice carried from the garden, where Jackson was teaching their daughter to toddle among the autumn flowers. "Mama, look!" Sarah stepped onto the porch, her heart full at the sight of her husband's strong hands steadying their child's wobbly steps. Grace had her father's determined chin and her mother's curious eyes, a perfect blend of their love. "She's getting stronger every day," Jackson said, scooping Grace up as she stumbled, "just like her mama." The ranch had grown too, flourishing under their shared care. The new Hereford bulls had improved their stock. Sarah's expanded gardens provided vegetables for half the town, and Rebecca's business acumen had turned their preserve operation into a profitable venture. Their father had indeed bought the Stevens place, though he spent more time on their porch with his granddaughter than actually ranching. Mrs. Rivera's extended family had slowly migrated to the area, bringing their skills and traditions, enriching the community they'd built. Even Charles's shadow had faded. The last they'd heard, he'd moved east, his obsession with controlling Sarah finally broken by the sight of her true happiness. "Looking back?" Jackson asked, joining her on the porch with Grace sleepy in his arms. "Looking forward," Sarah corrected, taking his free hand. "Though sometimes I marvel at how far we've come, Mama," Grace mumbled, reaching for her. Sarah took her daughter, breathing in her sweet scent. "You know," Jackson said softly, A stranger might ride up that road any day, needing help like you." "Oh, did?" Sarah smiled, remembering her own desperate arrival. "And we'll open our door, won't we?" "Always." He kissed her temple. "After all, you never know when a broken soul might just need a chance to become whole." Inside, Mrs. Rivera called them for supper. Their extended family would be gathering: Rebecca and her new beau, their father, ranch hands and their families. The table would be full, the house warm with love and laughter. Sarah looked at her husband, their daughter, their home. "I'm not broken anymore," she whispered. "No," Jackson agreed, leading his family inside. "You're just perfectly, beautifully whole." And they walked into their future together,